Hi, my name is James. It's been a year since I started attending a traditional Catholic parish coming from a Protestant background, and I thought it would be interesting to do a video covering what I've learned in that time and my experiences. So, the first interesting thing is just being able to rest in my faith. The thing about Protestantism is it's very much a choose your own adventure sort of religion, meaning you have there's several hundred topics, and you have many variations of positions for each of those topics. And so the permutations are seemingly endless. So, as someone who is both intellectually minded and takes his faith seriously, I just found that exhausting. So, there's all these books like Five Views on Justification, and it's like, well, do I take John Piper's view, or N.T. Wright's, or James Dunn, or Michael Bird's, or whoever? And that's just one topic, and there's hundreds of topics. And so, what I found in my Christian journey is that I would go to a church that seemed legit, and I would be there for a while, and then you discover there's personal issues. But then after a while, it's like, I also kind of don't think they're right. And then I would go somewhere else, and that process would repeat itself, which was really hard, not only on me, but especially on my family, because I was kept jerking them around because I was searching for the truth, essentially. But again, there's all these permutations of churches, so you really are never going to find the quote unquote truth. And Protestants there's basically two ways of dealing with that. So you can either, on the one hand, you can say it's not really that important. You can, say, I've heard jokes from the pulpit about people who take their beliefs too seriously. Or on the other hand, you can subdivide into ever smaller kind of denominations or churches. And that's not healthy either. So, coming to a traditional Catholic perspective where they sort of believe what Christians have believed for centuries and millennia, you can kind of rest in that. So there's like these, I don't know the number, like 150 quote unquote dogmas, where this is a fixed belief, meaning it's important enough that the leadership of the church has decided here's what Christians believe on this topic. And it's not really up for debate, which is wonderful, because there is no like five views on X dogma, because there's only one view. And so coming into a traditional Catholic world, I can just rest in that. So I'm not above that topics, figuring it out and controlling it. I'm just receiving it, which is a very different posture and allows kind of rest and stability, because I know this is what it is. Now there's these secondary, tertiary topics that aren't dogmas, and I can take a position on those, but I'm also not probably going to die on that hill. So that just creates a lot more stability. So I would say that's kind of one of the main things that I've experienced, is just being able to rest and receive. Another outshoot of that is that there's a clear path for spiritual development and growth. So as a Protestant, what I experienced is there's, these popular books that come out that you'll see on the shelf at Christian bookstores when there were Christian bookstores around, and the pastor would preach on them, and your guys group would read through it and discuss it, and then, 10 years later, you're like, oh, that was all kind of garbage. And so your spiritual life is just a succession of fad books, basically, that end up being wrong, just because it was popular at the time you were reading it. Now contrast that with a traditional Catholic approach where we've got writings all the way back to the time of the apostles, and there's these kind of masters of the faith that are acknowledged. They're called doctors of the church. There's like 20, I don't know what the number is, but doctor just means skilled. So it's someone that's skilled in Christianity that you can learn from. So you're not learning from someone with a good marketing strategy. You're learning from a literal master of Christianity. So just as an aside, my current plan, I'm reading through St. John of the Cross's Ascent to Mount Carmel, A Doctor of the Church, and then I'm going to read Mansions by St. Teresa of Avila, another Doctor of the Church, and that'll give me a solid spiritual grounding as far as spiritual practices and growth. And then I'm going to do St. Thomas Aquinas's Summa, which is a big ask, but again, a Doctor of the Church. And so after reading that, I will have like a stable spiritual and intellectual foundation to then live from the rest of my life, as opposed to bouncing from fad to fad. Okay, so the next kind of topic, post kind of resting in tradition, I think is interesting, is the Mass itself. So in a Protestant world, the Sunday service is kind of created by the pastor, the board of elders, the worship leader. And so it's not necessarily like this fixed thing. And so you're again kind of standing above it, judging it. So the pastor will come up with this service, order of service. The worship leader will do this sort of progression of songs. And then you go home after church. You maybe discuss the service with your friends. How'd it go? What'd you think of this or that? And so again, as with doctrine, you're kind of standing above it, judging it. Whereas in the Catholic world, the Mass just is. The Mass is the Mass. So here's the missal that we use. So this is the 1962 missal. So we use this one because it's the last official version before things kind of went haywire in Vatican II. And so it's a fixed thing. It's like, I find the pages. It's like, this is something like the Mass here, and the surrounding pages are like the readings and the prayers that do change, but the core of it stays the same, and it's said every day. So someone is saying the Mass somewhere in the world right now, and it's the same thing, which is very cool. So the Mass doesn't change, you change. And so your experience of the Mass is different because you're different. So it's kind of flipped on its head from a Protestant perspective, where it's the service that changes over time. And you obviously change a little bit, but the main change is the service itself. Whereas in the traditional Catholic world, the Mass is fixed, and you're experiencing it differently based on your spiritual development, experiences during the week, and so on. So that's an interesting and essential aspect of attending a traditional Catholic parish. Another big thing that was dramatically different is just the family dynamics of a traditional parish. If you're not aware, traditional Catholics don't believe in using birth control. Now, this is the traditional Christian position, not just Catholic, but Christian in general. So Protestants only recently started accepting the use of birth control. So what that means practically is that it's fairly common in my parish for parents to have, let's say, 10 children, up to 15 children. I don't know what the average is, but 8 to 15 children per family is completely normal. And that's just radically different. So coming from a Protestant background, we might have more kids than the popular culture, but not much more. So I have 3, 2 would be normal, 1 would be normal, 4 is getting up there, so we're not talking 10 to 15. There aren't usually a selection of full-size vans in a Baptist parking lot, although I'm sure it happens. But just think about like the math of that. So parents have 10 children, those 10 children have 10 children, and so on. So you've got this kind of nearly exponential growth of families, and that creates interesting dynamics, and it's fairly easy for families to kind of overwhelm the parish. And not that that's a bad thing, but it's just different. Because I've gone to more like suburban churches most of my life, where I don't want to say it's like going to the mall, although I went to a church that's like 10,000 people, and that was very much like going to the mall, but it's small family units of like 4 to 5. It's not like 50, so it's very different different feeling, different dynamics, because you've got potentially tensions between families or whatever, and there's interrelations and so on. And so family becomes a huge part of parish life. So that was a new thing. Now, let's see. As far as negatives go, I don't want to be the sort of person who joins a church and then is suddenly airing their dirty laundry to the world. So I'm not going to get into like too many negatives. I'll do one that I think is important if you're considering attending this sort of parish, for just you to be aware of and prepared for. And that's, again, following this family dynamic, is that there's insiders and outsiders. So when you attend, you're going to be an outsider unless someone brings you in. And all these people are interrelated because of this family thing I told you about. So there's people at the Mass I attend where they've got 40 family members in the Mass with them, like literally 40. And so when they leave the Mass, there's like 40 of their family members for them to engage with. And they don't necessarily have the bandwidth to engage with random John Doe guy out to the side over here, and maybe they're introverted and don't have the propensity for that anyway. But just practically speaking, that means that when you first come, there is a period where you're going to be an outsider, and that's an uncomfortable feeling. You don't know them, they don't know you, and they're probably not going to talk to you, and they won't talk to you for a long time. And that's not actually okay, but it's just the reality of it, and you just need to be okay with that. It's not personal, it just is what it is. So you need to find an end somehow. So how I did it was I connected with the priest, who then connected me with my godparents, and then I joined the choir, and that was kind of an inroad to start making connections throughout the parish. And kind of once you're in, but you've got to push through that initial season of being an outsider. And it's not personal. Again, it just is what it is. So that's just something to be aware of. Just even the architecture of the church I attend. So you're outside the building, walk up the stairs, you open the door, and you're in the sanctuary. So there is no meet and greet area. There are no greeters. So you walk in, walk to your pew, genuflect, kneel down and pray. There's the Mass. You pray after the Mass, you walk out, and you're done. So there is no really point at which you can connect easily. You can kind of try to insert yourself into conversations and things like that. So why I pushed through personally was I came to believe this was the correct option. And so I didn't have any other options. So I just had to persevere, basically, because there was no choice. And I'm glad I did, but it was uncomfortable for several months. Another negative that I'm comfortable talking about is just a certain lack of leadership capacity. So this Society of St. Pius X has grown by 50% since COVID. And a traditional Catholic church is not able to deal with that rate of growth because creating a priest is very difficult. It takes, say, 7 years to create a priest. And during that 7-year period, a lot of guys are going to decide it's not for them, or they're not suited for it for some reason or other. And so you end up not getting very many priests out of the pipeline at the end. Now the positives of that are it's very stable. At the end of that process, the priest will know what they're talking about. They'll be devout and serious and prepared. But that does mean they can't react quickly to change in the world. Whereas, contrast that with, say, a sort of Southern Baptist approach where it's like, we need a pastor. Who wants to be the pastor? Oh, okay, Bob will be the pastor. Let's go. Okay, and that's kind of it, which means they can expand rapidly, which is why you've got Southern Baptist churches all over the South, because as Americans went westward, they just created churches with them as they went. So there's a strength there, but there's also a tremendous weakness. So I just mentioned this because that's just the reality. If there aren't leaders, it can't really be well run. And that's not the fault of an individual. It's just staffing, basically. And the other thing, just talking about the leadership at the top, when I started attending the parish, there were 3 bishops in the entire world. And then one of them died. So there are 2 bishops for the entire world right now. I don't know what the correct number of bishops is, but it's not 2. It's, maybe 10, 20. I don't know what the answer is. But there needs to be dramatically more leaders than there are right now. And so, again, just attending one of these churches, you just have to accept that's the reality on the ground. And it just is what it is. And but again, the positives outweigh the negatives. And again, I'm attending this sort of a parish because I believe it's true, and they're doing things correctly to their best of their capacity at this time, and they're all good people. I guess another positive I will say was when I'm evaluating churches, or historically when I've evaluated churches, what I'm looking for, one of the main things I would look for is generational stability. So one generation of people can sort of fake it. Maybe you're doing it like as a social club or something like that, but it's really like, how are the kids' generation and the grandkids' generation? And so when you attend a church, what you want to see is multi-generational stability. So you want the grandparents to be devout, the parents to be devout, the children to be devout, and so on. And that means there's healthy spiritual practice at the church. And that's really what I've seen. There are generations of families that are all seeking Christ again, and that's the goal. So I hope this video was helpful for you, and I hope you have a great day. God bless.